My son is ashamed to call me father in front of his wealthy new in-laws. Tonight is the grand party for his latest success, and he introduced me to the guests as his old bookkeeper, just so his fake status wouldn't crumble. He has no idea that the man he's humiliating is the one who laid the very bricks of the company he claims as his own. Tonight, I'm going to give him a lesson he'll remember for the rest of his life. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is Arthur. I'm 65 years old, and I've lived long enough to know that some kinds of pain don't announce themselves loudly. They arrive quietly, dressed as pride, ambition, or success. I thought I understood loss when I buried my wife 15 years ago. I was wrong. There is another kind of burial, standing alive while your own child lowers you into the ground with his words. I stood near the far wall of that penthouse, glass stretching from floor to ceiling, the city glittering behind it like something none of us truly owned. The room smelled like expensive cologne and entitlement. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter floated easily, too easily. These people were celebrating my son, David. My son. At least that's what he used to call me. David moved through the room like he belonged to it. Tailored suit, confident smile. The posture of a man who believed the world had finally recognized his greatness. Every few steps, someone stopped him to shake his hand, praise his vision, congratulate him on being self-made. Every time I heard that phrase, something tightened in my chest. Then it happened. A group of guests approached us, men with silver watches and women with polite, practiced smiles. One of them asked, "And you must be very proud of David." David didn't hesitate, not even a flicker of discomfort. "Oh, Arthur," he said lightly, placing a hand on my shoulder the way you might steady an elderly neighbor. "He helped me years ago. Did some bookkeeping when I was starting out." The word hung in the air. Bookkeeping, no father, no history, no blood. Just a role small enough not to interfere with his image. Someone nodded, already losing interest in me. Another offered a distracted smile. And just like that, I was reduced, filed away as harmless, irrelevant, forgettable. I didn't correct him. I didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded once. The way you do when confirming a number that's already been miscounted. Because I've learned something over the years. When people lie about you in public, they're not doing it because you're weak. They're doing it because the truth terrifies them. David drifted away, laughter trailing behind him. His new wife, Vanessa, barely acknowledged me. She looked past me, through me as if I were part of the furniture. I realized then that she had accepted his version of the story completely. In her world, men like me existed only to be stepped over. I watched my son from across the room, and memories crept in uninvited. I remembered the first ledger, handwritten cheap paper, coffee stains in the margins. I remembered nights at the kitchen table, calculator clicking while David slept upstairs, convinced he was building something alone. I remembered signing documents I didn't fully agree with because he said, "Trust me, Dad." I did, every time. I remembered the seed money, my retirement fund, the one my wife and I had built dollar by dollar. I remembered transferring it without hesitation because a father doesn't see money. When he looks at his child, he sees potential. None of that existed in this room. Here David was a myth, a clean origin story polished for wealthy ears. The party grew louder, music swelled. A screen behind the stage cycled through images of success, offices, logos, headlines. I noticed the time. We were getting close to the main speech, the moment where David would officially crown himself. My hands were steady. My heart was not. People assume revenge is loud, angry, explosive. That's what movies teach us. But real reckoning is quieter, colder. It waits patiently while arrogance finishes talking. David caught my eye once from across the room, just for a second. There was something there. Unease, maybe, or guilt he hadn't fully buried. He gave a subtle nod toward the back, a silent instruction to stay where I wouldn't be seen. That gesture hurt more than the word bookkeeper ever could, because it wasn't denial. It was shame. I took a slow sip of water and let the bitterness settle. Around me, the room buzzed with admiration for a man who believed he had finally escaped his past. He didn't realize his past was standing 10 feet away, holding every receipt. The announcement lights dimmed slightly. The band quieted. People began drifting toward the stage. David was about to speak, and I knew, with a calm that surprised even me, that by the time he finished, this room would never see him the same way again. I wasn't here to beg for recognition. I wasn't here to ruin him out of anger. I was here to close the books, and once the books are closed, there's no rewriting the numbers. David stepped onto the stage to polite applause, the kind that sounds generous, but costs nothing. The spotlight caught him perfectly, like the room itself had been designed to frame him as the final product. He smiled, adjusted the microphone, and waited for the silence to settle. I stayed where I was, near the edge of the room, half shadowed by a decorative column, exactly where he wanted me. Present, but invisible. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice smooth. "Practiced. This company started it as an idea, just a vision, and like all great visions, it required belief. Belief, I almost laughed. He spoke about risk, about courage, about long nights and impossible odds. Every sentence carved him further into the myth he had been selling all evening. Heads nodded, glasses lifted. His father-in-law watched with folded arms in quiet approval. Vanessa stood near the front, chin raised, already enjoying the reflected glow of his success. David gestured toward the massive screen behind him. "I want to show you a short presentation," he said, "something that captures where we came from and where we're going." The technician at the sound booth prepared the feed. A young man couldn't have been older than 25. Focused, efficient, the kind who follows instructions and doesn't ask questions. I'd been watching him for the last 20 minutes, waiting for the exact moment when the room was fully committed to David's version of reality. As the applause rose again, I moved, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to seem like an old man looking for help. I approached the sound booth from the side, leaning in slightly, lowering my voice. "David wanted me to give you this," I said, slipping the small drive into my palm and then onto the console. "Updated file. He said the original one didn't properly credit the early contributors." The technician glanced at me for half a second, just long enough to confirm I looked harmless, and nodded. "Got it." That was all it took. David turned back to the crowd, confidence fully restored. "This," he said, "is the story of how a dream becomes reality." The lights dimmed. The first image appeared on the screen. Not the sleek logo everyone expected, but a scanned, yellowed ledger page. Handwritten, uneven ink, my handwriting. The room murmured, confused. David's smile froze. He turned slightly, eyes narrowing as he tried to process what he was seeing. The next slide appeared. A wire transfer. My name, my account. The exact amount of my retirement fund, dated 17 years earlier. Someone in the front row leaned forward. Another whispered something I couldn't hear, but I didn't need to. The language of numbers is universal. David laughed once, sharply. "Ah, looks like we've pulled an old archive by mistake," he said, trying to sound amused. "Just a little glitch." But the screen didn't listen to him. The next image was a letter he wrote to me. The words were unmistakable, enlarged enough for the room to read. "Dad, I need your help. I promise I'll make you proud. I won't forget this. I swear." Vanessa's smile disappeared. The room went completely silent. David turned fully now, staring at the screen like it had betrayed him personally. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked toward the sound booth, panic flashing across his face as his eyes found mine. For the first time that night, he saw me. Not as a liability, not as an embarrassment, but as a threat. "This isn't funny," he said into the microphone, his voice cracking just enough for people to notice. "Who did this?" The next slide answered without speaking. Security footage. from earlier that evening, clear, silent, damning. David leaning toward me, his finger pointing toward the back of the room, his face tight with irritation, the unmistakable body language of a man ashamed of the person who raised him. A collective intake of breath moved through the crowd. Someone said it out loud this time. "Is that his father?" David dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a hollow thud that echoed louder than any applause had all night. I stepped away from the booth. Every movement felt heavy, but steady. The room parted instinctively, as if truth carried its own gravity. People looked at me differently now, with recognition, with calculation, with something dangerously close to respect. David stood frozen, eyes locked on me, his expensive suit suddenly doing nothing to hold him upright. His father-in-law looked at the floor. Vanessa took a step back, then another, already creating distance, already rewriting her own version of events. I reached the edge of the stage. David whispered, barely audible, "Dad, please." He held the microphone out to me with shaking hands. For years I had carried him. Tonight I let him carry the weight himself. I took the microphone, and the room waited. I didn't rush to speak. Silence, when it's earned, is louder than any accusation. I looked out at the faces in front of me, people who had dismissed me an hour earlier, people who now understood they had been standing on borrowed ground. Then I looked at David, not the man in the suit, the boy I used to steady on a bicycle, my hand hovering just behind his back. "Good evening," I said into the microphone. My voice didn't shake. That surprised even me. "My name is Arthur." A ripple went through the crowd, some recognition, some embarrassment. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight," I continued. "I came because my son invited me, or rather, because he allowed me to attend." A few uncomfortable shifts. He introduced me as his bookkeeper, and in the narrowest sense of the word, that's true. I kept the books. I kept them when the numbers didn't work. I kept them when the bank said no. I kept them when the lights were about to go out. David's head dropped. He stared at the floor like it might open up and take him with it. "I also kept promises," I said. "Promises a father makes when he believes that love is enough to build a future." I turned slightly, gesturing to the screen behind me. "Everything you see up there is real. Every document, every transfer, every late-night decision made by a man who trusted his son more than he trusted himself." Someone near the back cleared their throat. No one laughed. No one interrupted. "I want to be very clear," I said. "I'm not here to claim ownership of what David built. The company is legally his. The success is his. But the story he's been telling, about standing alone, about having no help, that story cost him something far more valuable than money." I looked back at him then. Finally, it cost him his name. David swallowed hard. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "I taught my son how to read balance sheets," I said quietly. "But I failed to teach him that you can't erase people the way you erase entries, especially not the ones who stood behind you when you had nothing worth celebrating." The CEO David had been courting earlier stood up slowly. He didn't say a word, just adjusted his jacket and walked toward the exit. Two others followed, then another, not dramatically, just decisively. Reputation, once cracked, doesn't need help falling apart. Vanessa was already gone. I hadn't seen her leave, but the space where she'd been standing was empty, like she'd never existed at all. That absence spoke volumes. I felt the weight of the microphone in my hand and realized I was finished. There was nothing left to explain. Truth doesn't require repetition. "I wish my son success," I said, my voice softer now. "I truly do. But success without humility is just a louder way to be alone." I set the microphone down on the stage, gently. No applause followed. None was needed. I stepped off the stage and walked through the room. People moved out of my way, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Some nodded. Some looked away. A few tried to say something, then thought better of it. This wasn't a moment to network. This was a moment to remember. At the elevator, I paused. I could still see David in my peripheral vision. He hadn't moved. He stood exactly where I left him, surrounded by the ruins of a story he could no longer sell. "Dad," he said, his voice finally finding me. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." I turned. Slowly. "You did," I said. "You just didn't think I'd still be standing when it did." The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I saw him reach out. Too late, unsure whether he was trying to stop me or save himself. The doors met softly, sealing him on one side of the glass and me on the other. On the ride down, my reflection stared back at me. Older, tired, but lighter. The lobby was quiet. Outside, the night air was cool and honest. I walked toward my truck, the same one David used to mock, the one that never pretended to be anything it wasn't. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment before turning the key. There was no triumph in my chest, no satisfaction, only closure. Some people think revenge is about watching someone fall. It isn't. It's about standing still while the truth finally catches up to them. And as I drove away from the building, its lights shrinking in my rearview mirror, I knew there was only one part of this story left to tell. The road was quiet, the kind that lets your thoughts get ahead of you if you're not careful. I kept both hands on the wheel, feeling the familiar vibration of the engine, grounding myself in something real. Behind me, in that glass tower, David was facing the aftermath, the kind no press release can fix. Ahead of me was a small house on a dark street, a place that didn't impress anyone but had never lied to me either. At a red light, my phone buzzed, once, then again. I didn't look at it. I already knew who it was. Some conversations arrive years too late, no matter how urgent they sound. I pulled into my driveway and shut off the engine. The silence settled in slowly. I sat there for a while, longer than I needed to, letting the night finish what the truth had started. When I finally went inside, the house greeted me the way it always did, quiet, unchanged, honest. My wife's picture was still on the mantel. I paused in front of it. "Well," I said softly, as if she could hear me, "he knows now." I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table where it had all begun. The ledgers were gone, the papers long filed away, but I could still see them if I closed my eyes. I thought about David as a boy, asking questions, watching my hands as I worked. Somewhere along the way, he learned how to build something impressive, but forgot why he wanted to build anything at all. Near midnight, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Dad," David said. His voice was hoarse, stripped of polish. "They're pulling out. Investors, partners, Vanessa's parents. They want explanations." I listened. I didn't interrupt. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said. "I just wanted them to respect me." "I did respect you," I replied, "before tonight." Silence filled the space between us. Not the awkward kind, the honest kind. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. I thought about that. Really thought about it. "Yes," I said finally. "You can sit with what you did, and you can decide whether the man you became tonight is the one you're willing to live with." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. When the call ended, I felt no relief, just acceptance. Some lessons don't come with comfort. They come with clarity. I went to bed that night and slept deeper than I had in years. In the weeks that followed, I heard things. Pieces of the fallout made their way back to me through mutual acquaintances and quiet conversations. David stayed on as CEO, but the board changed. Oversight tightened. His name no longer carried the same weight. The myth was gone. All that remained was the man underneath it, and the work of deciding who that man would be. We didn't speak for a long time after that, not out of anger, out of necessity. One afternoon, months later, he came by the house. No suit, no audience, just him. He stood on the porch like a kid again, unsure whether he was welcome. "I brought something," he said, holding out a folder. Inside were copies of the old documents, the real ones, and a new one, a revised company history, accurate, complete. My name where it belonged, Not in lights, not on a pedestal, just present. "I'm not asking you to come back," he said. "I just didn't want to keep lying." I nodded. "That's a start." He left after that. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't pretend I was someone else. Now, years later, I tell this story not because I'm proud of what happened, but because I understand it. We spend our lives building things, believing success will protect us from being forgotten. But success built on denial is fragile. It cracks the moment the truth walks into the room. That night, I didn't destroy my son. I returned him to himself, and sometimes that's the hardest kind of reckoning there is. If you like this story, please like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching.